Hark and well met, folks, and welcome back to another brunch. Happy Halloween to everybody who's getting ready to celebrate the spooky season, and a happy November to everybody who's watching this on YouTube after the fact. In case you're wondering, my Halloween costume today is somebody who's got their life together, which I couldn't even do properly because I started late. Guys, we have a very special brunch stream in store for today. We're going to be doing this one a little bit more on the fly, even more on the fly than I usually do, which is pretty crazy for me, if I'm being honest. We're going to be doing a rather interesting and on-theme discussion. I'm going to be talking about the archaeology of monsters. Things that go bump in the night. Curious mysteries, myths, legends, stories that have drafted our cultural development and the entirety of this holiday, at least as it's celebrated nowadays. What exactly do I mean by that? Well, obviously we have all of these different legends, lores, and things that go into the concept of monsters, right? Things that go bump in the night, which have driven our cultural development for a very long period of time. Stories of scary things to keep kids from misbehaving or to stop travelers from wandering into the weird depths of dark woods. Mainly just like things that are told to help keep us safe, right? That sort of thing shows up in the archaeological record in some capacity. It's not always like, black and white of, what exactly you're looking at in terms of a monster and a story and a legend and all that, but there is absolutely an archaeological record for these less concrete theories and concepts. Listen, please, man, I need that subscribe button hit. I need you to subscribe. I need it, please, God, just give me the subscribe. Let's take a look. The first image we're going to see today is going to be a little bit of a familiar sight. Talking about the archaeology of monsters. Different creatures from throughout our species history that have inspired fear, stories, legends, myths, spooky feelings in general, right? We've talked a little bit about this subject before. The idea of mythological beasts and creatures. And I want to recap a little bit of that and then go into a couple other popular monsters and maybe see where they kind of sit in the archaeological record. This is by no means going to be all encompassing. I'm not a super specialist in this subject. I took a folklore class in college that was pretty fun. That kind of maybe covered a little bit of these subjects, but we're just going to go through some of the basics and some of the popular monsters. If I have to blow my nose throughout this presentation, it's because my kid got sick again. First up is a subject that I know that we have talked about before, the Cyclops. The mythological idea of the Cyclops as it pertains to archaeology is a subject that we have discussed previously because the idea behind it is fascinating. It's a misinterpretation of existing creatures to create a sort of new horror. Because part of humanity's entire religious and folklore development over the course of our entire history has been trying to explain the unexplainable. There are forces in this world that we do not understand and that we did not understand back then. And as we have learned more of those things, a lot of these have fallen by the wayside. The sun and the moon don't move through the sky because gods are pulling them on various chariots, right? We have learned that they move because of gravitational forces and just physics in general. As these monstrous creatures were developed based on potentially fossil finds from earlier time periods or from just concepts of what happens to people who suffer or die in mysterious circumstances, we are just hoping to explain all that through the use of monsters. And we see that in Greece with the Cyclops. Seeing those small mammoths, and then, of course, seeing their bones reoriented into a way that seems more humanoid, could definitely facilitate the thought process of this horrid beast, this horrid creature being derived of it. And now the Cyclops, of course, was a very, very big myth from the Odyssey. It was the forgotten son of Poseidon, a horrible being that lived on these islands who would, kill sailors who were washed ashore. And it's very possible that this myth might have just derived from the idea of like, well, we had these sailors, they went missing, they, crashed and went ashore on this island, and they're dead now, and we don't know where they are, or we never saw them again. They had to have been slurped up by this monster, right? Or that's at least the thought process that perhaps a lot of people take. I can't put words in mouths, but I can guesstimate based on what I would think and what I see. That is kind of the gist of what we're going at here. Monsters are being developed as a means to explain the unexplainable, a lot of times as it pertains to really bad things happening to people. And the Cyclops is not alone in this. Vampires. Vampires are obviously a big monster, one of the top monsters, right? We've got the idea of these dead beings coming back to prey upon the living. A recurring theme that I've discovered in cultural phenomena related to monsters and like human ideals, zombies also kind of fit within this theme. Humans are terrified of other humans, as we should be. We're terrifying beings. Vampires are just people who came back from the dead and cannot be killed as easily as other humans. Zombies, same deal. Humans who come back, but we have lost that element that stops us from just wantonly murdering each other, right? Zombies just want to go about and eat people. They follow pursuit predation, where they run you down. They never get tired as much as we do. So while we're running away from these things, they never get tired. They just keep coming. And even though they don't move as fast as us, they just hunt constantly. And these ideals are kind of the driving force behind a lot of undead. And so looking at this recent discovery, dated from September of this year, archaeologists unearthed the remains of a 17th century female vampire found in Poland. Now, why do they think that this person was a vampire? Well, it's not like the skeleton had pointy fangs. You can see right here that their teeth was rather typical. But it's the means by which the living treated this person after the fact. And that's where a lot of our archaeology comes from, right? Our ideas of what cultures were believing and what folklore and stories people were telling is present in these remains that are left behind. This figure was buried in the ground with a sickle placed in that manner. You can see the sickle right here, placed across, covering the area where the neck would be. The idea being, in theory, that when this dead figure rose as a vampire, the sickle would remove the head as it was being lifted, which decapitation was one of the go-to methods of getting rid of vampires. Those of you who are watching me play Ark on the roleplay server as a pseudo-vampire hunter know that I also am a fan of decapitating vampires. But it's a method which typically works. Other types of burials that you'll see that kind of fit within the same mold include pre-decapitations, where they'll take a dead person, they will remove the head and place it down beneath the feet. And they'll place it in between the legs so that the head is detached from the body, and if the undeadness happens, it won't be able to get itself back together. This figure also, in addition to having this sickle across the neck, also had, I believe they said, a padlock through the foot. I think the idea being that you are locked into your grave, right? Now, this one is a 17th century Polish cemetery, so that would have been like the 1600s. Sometime in like the mid-16th centuries. In Poland near Bydgoszcz. Oh, dear God, I'm terrible at Polish. I'm not even going to try it. Was the big toe especially important? I would say that since they did it around the big toe, yeah. I mean, if they wanted to do it, they also could have done it around the ankle to like chain the foot there, but maybe it's just because the big toe would have been the easiest to get the padlock through, maybe. I don't think it was like, oh, the left big toe is the only one that stops vampirism. I don't think it was that down to point. But they also had many other methods of doing things like this too. I mean, obviously there's the driving a wooden stake through the heart. Classics, can't fight the OGs. As well as just trying to find other ways to get rid of the body. You know, they would cremate the body, decapitate, as I said, as well as there was also one that I saw, it said drilling holes through the legs. Like they would drill holes through the legs and the bones so that when the person came back, they wouldn't be able to walk. And so the vampire wouldn't be able to escape from where it was at. Burying corpses upside down so they get confused. Severing the tendons at the knees, again for the walking thing. Or in the case of the Greek Vrikolikos, placing crosses and inscribed pottery fragments on the chest of the deceased. These vampiric myths are found in many different forms across cultures, right? A lot of these monsters are found in many different forms across cultures. But a lot of them were just things that came back from the dead to either suck blood or life force or take children or just all of these kind of, like, again, tying into the idea that these undead were hunters of man, right? They were causes of death in mysterious ways that couldn't be explained otherwise, which is what a monster is. We don't know how this person died. It doesn't make any sense. It had to have been a monster that did it. And that's just kind of been a driving force behind us culturally. And it created this mass hysteria, especially during this time period of like the 16 to like the 1800s, you know, obviously. And that's when they started writing things about this. Polidori's The Vampire, Finau's Carmilla, and then of course Bram Stoker's Dracula, which it's especially crazy to think about those stories and those tales from the context of saying like, oh, these people thought they were real. This was a real thing. They were like, we're making this film as much to, you know, capitalize on this frenzy that's gripping everyone. And like, yeah, maybe we have our doubts. No one's actually seen one. Like, we can't really document it. But like, you know, this mania was gripping people in a time when global communication wasn't that intense. You know, these books would get written and people are like, oh, crap. They're dealing with some stuff in Europe right now. Let me tell you. They've got people sucking blood. They got dudes turning into bats. And similarly, along the same vein, and also one of the top classic monsters, is the werewolf. A skinwalker, a man who becomes beast, right? Again, tying into that idea that we had where vampires were just like the biggest monsters that we know, humans, and that zombies were, you know, humans who had lost their humanity and become more just like all instinct, all the need to feed. Werewolves kind of tie into that too. They are also humans that have lost their humanity and instead have just become bestial in form. They are all primal instinct, a need to hunt, a need to feed, and specifically those things on other people. I'm pulling the Scandinavian example of werewolves just because A, I think it's a really fun story, and B, that's my area of speciality, and C, I wanted to. So looking at the idea of the werewolf, it obviously changes throughout a bunch of cultures, and funnily enough, they are, you know, heavily influenced in Eastern Asia, Eastern Europe, and Romania, again, similar to a lot of vampire myths. But the vampires of Scandinavia, at least, have a little bit of respite in that their symptoms, their condition, was more temporary. It wasn't like a curse that happened on the full moon. It was more man's hubris coming back to bite them. Pun intended. So what do I mean by that? Well, we know that Scandinavia has a fixation on man, like the blurring the line between man and beast, right? We have these iron plates, the Torslunda plates, which depict a figure with a wolf head alongside, now this is an Iron Age, this is not a Viking Age symbol, just to be clear. But we have a figure with a wolf, a lupine head, as a warrior, alongside a more traditional warrior figurine. This one has actually horns on the helmet, funnily enough. These images and these ideas kind of drove the concept similar to a berserker, right? Someone who wears bear skins and kind of goes into this crazy rage. There was also this other concept called the Ulfheden, the wolf head, or the wolf warrior. So looking at the wolf warrior, we get kind of the same concept that we're looking at with berserkers, bear warriors. Not just in the more metaphorical sense of like, oh, these warriors don these wolf skins and then they kind of change and become something entirely different. We see this also present in the sagas, stories, legends, and tales. In the saga of the Volsungs, there's a father and son figure, Sigmund and Sinfjotli. And the two of them came across these wolf pelts while they were lost in the woods. And they were very elaborately well made, and they definitely had a reverence to them. They were in really good shape, and they had an awe about them. And the two of them said, we could take these and we could use these for ourselves. So they took the wolf pelts and they donned them. And when they did so, they were overcome by the spirits of these wolves. The skins enveloped them and they became the beasts themselves. They became werewolves. And they prowled, and it was about like 6 or 9 days or something like that they just like hunted and fed and did all of these horrible things. And it ended tragically when Sigmund killed and ate the wolf form of his son, Sigfjotli. And then when he returned to his normal form and he shed the wolf skin, he had seen the horror that he had done, and he knew that he had stepped beyond the bounds of what he was supposed to as a mortal man. He had yearned for and found and used power that he was not prepared to control. And he paid the ultimate price for it. Losing track of that human element that bonds us together and creates our societies are what really make a monster, right? And that's what we're seeing here with this legend of the werewolf. And I think that even though it is from a different culture, you know, it's not the same as more classic werewolves of like, oh, you know, it's a curse and they can only turn at the full moon, and then they turn other people into werewolves and they kind of spread this plague around to other people. This is a little bit of a different take on that, but the concept is still the same there, you know. And that one is perhaps a little more tragic in that, well, I guess you can define it. Which one is more tragic? Is it the one where you choose to enter into that wolf state, knowing that yes, you're gaining a lot of power, but you are losing that humanity? Or is it more tragic that somebody has that choice taken from them, that they become a werewolf not by their own choice, but because they were bitten by another werewolf? And then every full moon they have to wait and watch and see as they transform and cause pain and horror onto the people around them, even though they don't want to. And it's tough to say which one's worse. Both are monsters in their own way. It's like one's a very Greek tragic, one's a very Shakespearean tragic. One's tragic in that like the forces of nature have conspired against you and caused you to do. That's very Grecian, you know. Similar thing happens to Hercules, where Hera kind of bewitches him and makes him think that his wife and kids are you know, sinister monsters, and so he ends up slaying them. That's kind of very much like a werewolf mentality. Whereas, like, you know, I feel like Shakespearean tragedies definitely would have been dealing with the hubris of man and their decisions to make these sorts of choices. Well, maybe I'm diving too deep into it. Staying within the realm of Scandinavia, but moving on to a new beast, we have the monster, the classic, the dragon. Looking at Scandinavian myths and stories about dragons, the great worms are you know, these vicious creatures, forces of nature, beings to be conquered for glory. And this is told through, perhaps most famously, the story of Sigurd. There are many Sigurd stones. This one here, technically not a rune stone. This is the Ramsund stone, which is a runic carving on a face of a rather large exposed stone, rather than having a actually raised rune stone with this image put upon it. I love this runic inscription. This is one of my favorite things. But the Ramsund rock here tells the entire legend of Sigurd, the story inscribed upon it, with Sigurd stabbing it, because in the tale, Sigurd hides in a ditch, and as the dragon passes over him, he sticks the sword up through it and guts it that way. Now, I'm not entirely sure what would have constituted a dragon myth in Scandinavia. I think that the concept of the dragon up there is still very much in flux as to its origin. You know, we've talked about theories on where dragons might have come from in the past, you know, saying, oh, well, perhaps it was dinosaur fossils that people are finding and are saying, ooh, look at this. This looks very large, angry lizard-like, you know? And there's definitely some merit to that idea. I like that idea. I think that Whether I would have to see the evidence to say whether or not it's 100% true. You can never say anything's really 100% true. These dragons show up on runestones constantly. Dragons on runestones is a concept that you're going to see in a lot of different places. The concept of the winding dragon motif stretching across all of these stones is pretty prevalent. The entwined serpent with these sort of lean draconic heads. I mean, and then the dragons show up on ship prows as well. It's just kind of it's a concept. It's a theme within Scandinavia. This myth, though, is not necessarily just tied to Scandinavia. Obviously, dragons show up almost everywhere. One example in a more mainland Europe is the idea of St. George. St. George the Dragon Slayer is a very famous thing. He discusses this is where a lot of like the true English dragon stories come from. The common theory, actually, regarding St. George and his slaying of a dragon is that it was not exactly a dragon in the sense of, like, you know what it's got here, the 4 legs with the wings and the serpentine motions or everything, but that it was a crocodile for when St. George traveled on trips to the Middle East and Northern Africa. This is a story that I've heard a couple of times where it was less that he was fighting like a true dragon and more that people were calling it a dragon because it was just such a massive lizard that people were unaccustomed to seeing in their homeland. And when they came here, they saw giant crocodiles and he slayed one. And this created a sort of legend and myth that spawned out of it. We know that exaggerations happen when people tell stories, and we know that oral tradition can get muddied as people expound on ideas and change them around a little bit. And so in the George myth, near Cappadocia, oh no, he was from Cappadocia, but they were going to the city of Salena in the province of Libya. And near this town, there was a pond as large as a lake where a plague-bearing dragon lurked. It was obviously an aquatic dragon or an aquatic beast of some kind, which crocodiles are. He'd put them in flight when they came out armed against him, for he used to come up to the city walls and poison everyone who came within reach of his breath. That's a little bit, I don't know how that would really constitute things from a crocodile standpoint. Maybe they heard the hissing. Maybe they heard the hissing of the crocodile as it came up and was like, because that's what they do. They kind of go and they make like a maybe they just heard the hissing and were like, oh my god, he's breathing poison! It's the gas! Run! But regardless, the water idea, the large lizard beast and everything all makes sense. And they would feed it 2 sheeps every day. George, meanwhile, came out and armed himself with the sign of the cross, of course. And he basically lanced it, which is a great way to take care of a crocodile. Because you give yourself a lot of distance. You just yoink from afar. But the idea for these people who weren't able to kind of conquer, if it was a huge crocodile, right? They can get massive. Here we go. Wikipedia. Here's one. Biggest crocodile, Low Long. Let's see how long Low Long is. Well, that doesn't look as big as I would have thought. But this one might not be. Look at that. That's a big thing. Crocodiles are man-eaters at times, you know? And this could certainly be construed as a dragon to a lot of people if they had to deal with this. Yeah, this concept of him fighting a dragon rather than a crocodile rather than, you know, a true traditional dragon form holds a lot of merit, and it still constitutes the same thing that we were talking about, which are these mythological monsters and beasts are meant to explain things that we don't understand. The people who came here, the people who were dealing with these monsters, these draconic monsters preying on the village, keeping them afraid, forcing tribute, was because they didn't understand what they were up against. Now, not every bit of this is done with good intentions, right? Sometimes these monsters, these myths, these legends are done so for other reasons, for gain. And we have to look at what constitutes true archaeological evidence and what that can tell us. You know, archaeological evidence like this, a myth and a legend told in action, a scythe or a sickle put over someone's head to make sure that they don't come back as a vampire, versus something like the Cardiff Giant. The Cardiff Giant was a 10-foot tall, 3,000-pound petrified giant found in Cardiff, New York in 1869. I say found, but it wasn't. And basically the idea was, it was this guy who was like, oh my gosh, I need you to dig a well right here. And when they dug the well, they found this massive petrified man, a huge being of unfathomable size and mystery, who was very obviously just carved out of stone. And they're trying to say that he was petrified in rock, you know, like a fossil, like he was fossilized entirely in his form. He's just some dude. But he's just, and they buried him there to make him seem like some kind of mystery. But he's just it's just a statue. It's just a statue that somebody made of this giant guy, and they were trying to pass it off as evidence that, you know, there used to be giants who walked the earth. We have seen a lot of people who, you know, bring up these images of people excavating giants, you know, in archaeological sites where they have, you know, giant human skeletons that are, you know, scaled way up, as showing proof that there used to be people that were unfathomably large that walked the earth. These are, of course, not true. It's really baffling that this comes about, because the very first one of these, the ones of people excavating giants, it was made because of a contest, a Photoshop contest, that was annoyingly specifically about, like, oh, try and come up with like a Photoshop contest to Photoshop some weird archaeological mystery, right? And what they did was they photoshopped it to look like giants and people with the giants, and it was done very well, so people believed it was real, right? Because that was the entire point of the contest, was to make it look as realistic as possible. But people took those images and just rolled with it, and we're like, no, there's giant Nephilim skeletons now, and all of these things, and the evidence is it's not there for those. People take these small stories, these tales that sometimes are told for fun, and they expound on them in big ways that end up being culturally shifting. There's an entire subculture of people who believe that those giants are real, right? And who tell stories about them. They hold just as much water as the vampires did to the people in the 1600s, who, though they had never seen a vampire themselves, they had heard about the things that they were doing or their existence, and believed it wholeheartedly, enough that they were doing, you know, that they were laying traps for vampires in loved ones' graves. And so the idea that a story is just that, a story, is never true when it comes to humanity, because we're going to take those things and we're going to run with it. Another similar vein to that is the Fiji mermaid, which this was something that was passed around as proof that mermaids exist. This little gremlin. And it's very obviously that it was a monkey stitched to a fish. Our friend the Fiji mermaid. But there were a lot of these, and they were actually like a thing that was created recreationally in Japan for a while. Like, a lot of people made these in Japan and sold them to tourists and stuff like that. But yeah, they're basically like these little gremlin monkey head, like, bodies. It's not really a mermaid. It's a monkey on a fish. It again ties into the idea that these mermaid concepts, right, stem from people seeing and hearing things while at sea that they could not explain. They were hearing sounds, they were seeing movements, and they had never seen them before. Dugongs and manatees were called mermaids by a lot of Columbus's initial crew, because they're like, oh, it's like they have a head that moves and forearms that kind of that move a little bit weird, and then they got the big fishtails. That's kind of like, I'm kind of using a whole bunch of different examples to hammer home the same point here, but you get where I'm going with this. The archaeology of monsters really just stems down to the archaeology of humans trying to understand things in this world that they don't or did not at that time. And that's kind of where we stand on that stuff. I could go into every monster if I wanted to. Yeah, but ultimately it's all kind of talking about the same two concepts of explaining elements of the natural world that we don't understand, and explaining elements of ourselves, our own humanity, or the forces that make us abandon our humanity. Humans that have stopped having their kind of empathy and social glue that makes them be a member of society and become more animalistic. And forces of nature that we have zero control over. There's thunderbirds in America that control thunderstorms, right? The Cyclops that we talked about at the beginning is the son of Poseidon, a god who gets angry and causes storms at seas. And the Cyclops ate people who washed ashore. These themes and concepts kind of tie each other together to draw what really is the whole point of monsters, which is providing a face, an image to something that scares us, so that we're not just looking in the dark, in the shadows, going, I don't know what's back in there, and that freaks me out. So I suppose in conclusion, yeah, monsters are varied. There's a bunch of different kinds of monsters. They're all used to explain why humans are weird and why the world around us is even weirder. And it's just important to know that, yeah, monsters typically aren't real. Unless they're the human ones. Those are very much real, and they're probably the worst ones.